Okay, folks, our next speaker is someone that, full disclosure, I admire and take advice from all the time. Your proof is that this morning when I opened the summit, I mentioned that 4 months ago I had decided to take on the big, hairy, audacious challenge. Sherrin Ingram is one of the reasons why. Now, in her copious commercial quantities of spare time, however, this amazing woman also runs the International Center for Strategic Planning. And this has been an effort where she has helped people focus on scaling that includes an element of aggressive growth, not scaling at a slow if fortune happens, but taking reins and driving an amazing level of growth, profitability, and solid community citizenship. Now, she has been active at any number of places, but I'm going to just mention a few, for example, because for a lot of us in technology, we don't see necessarily our ways clear to these kinds of roles. But Sherrin is involved with a different kind of technology. She comes from a technical training as an attorney. If you don't think that that is not systematic, and process driven, well, clearly you haven't talked to a lot of attorneys lately. But she also serves as the chairman of the board of the DuPage Housing Authority. So she walks her talk when she talks about getting involved in the community at a very active level. She's also served as a trusted advisor to CEO, CIOs, and chief operation officers. Folks in the leadership teams that she has counseled have continued to depend on her advice and on her ability to draw out from them the best that they can be. So please, since we were able to grab her despite her international conference and speaking schedule, please welcome Sherrin Ingram.
Oh, thank you, Kimi. Thank you. Thank you. Wanted to make sure that audio is coming through perfectly for you.
It is beautiful.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. All right. So I am so excited to really be here. I'm really excited to be talking about this topic on the power of uncertainty, really for leaders, because that's one, my domain. But two, the reason I love working with leaders is because of that um, raindrop effect, so to speak, that pebble, you're dropping it, that ripple effect. I can talk to one top leader, and because I get through to that person, they're able to cascade that out throughout the organization. So it's really, in many ways, I really get to have a bigger impact that way. It's not ego driven at all in that vein. So with that in mind, the topic of uncertainty is really key today, because all you hear about, really, I don't know if it's me, but I know all I hear about is uncertainty, right? Uncertainty, uncertainty. It's really hard to see a headline, maybe even receive an email. I don't know about your emails, but my emails, either that first line or the closing line, and many of them are something about to do, hope you're doing well in these times of uncertainty, right? It could really lead you to believe that somehow pre COVID, there was no uncertainty. And the truth is, there's always uncertainty, always uncertainty. There's nobody with the 100% crystal ball. Well, maybe Amazon with their new AI, but 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 for the rest of the world, we don't have the crystal ball, so we were always operating in uncertainty. So, what makes this time really different? And that's what I really want to talk about. So, I do have a couple of goals for our presentation today. First and foremost, I really want to provide some food for thought to leaders to help remind you of the upside of uncertainty. So much of what you do see in the media attaches uncertainty to the doom and gloom of a situation. But there are other aspects that many leaders are in fact capitalizing on. And I want to make sure that the leaders I get to expose myself to really are taking advantage of the momentum this uncertainty offers. My second goal for us today, really in this short time together, is to help you leverage that power of uncertainty to advance your leadership mission or your cause. Whatever you've got going on, really, how can you tap into this power to accelerate that advancement? And then, as best I can, really, from our virtual setting, I want to just provoke, maybe nudge a little bit, just to get you to be more intentional about how you engage others on this topic of uncertainty. What do you say to people when they bring up uncertainty? And more importantly, what do you say to yourself? All of these goals of mine really are designed to facilitate a change in the conversation. Again, I really want to take it from the doom and gloom to really looking at the other aspects of uncertainty. Now, Kimi did this beautiful introduction for me. I just wanted to highlight a few more things about my sort of past that is relevant to all that we're talking about here today. I mean, I really do get to operate a pretty successful consulting firm where we do focus on scaling and we focus on aggressive growth companies. We don't do as much of the turnaround as we used to do. I'm looking at the upside of things, so to speak, but I look for companies that are really ambitious and really desiring to grow faster than they would without the infrastructure I help them put together. So I'm all about infrastructure. And so much a part of that infrastructure really is bringing into bear a leadership mindset. I've had the chance to really share my messages all over the world with audiences of thousands at a time, down to just some very familiar boardrooms and everything in between. And I love documenting everything I talk about. Hence, I get to have a lot of books and reports and all that stuff. And I know it's small, but in the center there, that's my family. That's my husband, Michael, my son, Michael Jr., my daughter, Victoria. They are so much a part of what I do. And I'm really grateful for them putting up with me because some people do wonder how I get all of these things done. It's because I have, a great support team at the office, but more importantly, I have a great family that really truly is the wind beneath my wings in that regard. So I want to start things off really by answering the question about what is uncertainty. I want to make sure we really share this common definition as our foundation. Because that term is just used so much, we might have varied definitions. And your definition might differ from mine. I just want to tell you, how I'm approaching this particular topic. So when you think about uncertainty, you think about it as a noun. It's the noun of the adjective uncertain, but there's a couple of themes that emerge as you begin to examine all the various definitions that are around. You see things like questionable. You see things like, of indeterminate time and occurrence. I mean, we just don't know when things are going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen. And then the one that's really common is this without confidence. And I really think that's the one that just really nails it. It's an issue of confidence. When you hear people talking about uncertainty, what you really hear them saying is, I'm just not confident, right? I'm just not confident about what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen. That lack of confidence. And lack of confidence really is key because even outside of the pandemic, so much of what we do really is based on confidence. I mean, think about one of the measures of a healthy economy. You'll hear economists constantly referring to the consumer confidence index, because the more certain we feel about something, the more likely we are to take action with regard to that consumer index. The more confident we are, the more likely we are to spend money. The more likely we are to spend money, the more likely suppliers are to make their goods available. I mean, it has a really cascading economic effect for the economy. But in your personal life, it is exactly the same. When you lack confidence, you don't take action. It becomes a paralysis of thinking, a paralysis of imagining all the obstacles, all the things you might be doing. But when it boils down to the bottom line, it's a lack of confidence that keeps you from moving forward. You don't have that sense of certainty about your outcomes. So when we think about that, there are a couple of aspects to uncertainty that I just want to make known. Number one, when we're talking about an aspect of uncertainty, the first one really is approach. What we're really saying is, we don't know how we're going to do this. We have uncertainty about the approach to achieve our desired outcome. That's probably the most common aspect of uncertainty that I deal with in my business. I mean, people don't know how to get to A to Z, especially in a designated time frame. What's going to be the approach? And I come along with our strategic planning process to help them delineate that approach. Another aspect to approach, really, uncertainty is the duration. We're uncertain about how long something is going to take, or rather, how long, in the case of the pandemic, something is going to last, right? We hear that one a lot, and I think that's the one that is getting us the most with the pandemic. How long is this going to go on? We're uncertain, so many of us has lots of plans on hold, pending more certainty in that area. Another aspect is intensity. How deep, how wide, how much is it going to cost? I mean, how deep do we have to go with this? What's the real magnitude of this pain that I'm going to be feeling? That one I hear a lot implied, even though it's not overtly stated as often. Number four, change. That aspect, what's going to be different? And now, as we are probably in our 9th month of the pandemic, so to speak, we're getting a more sense of certainty about what's changed, right? We know that despite the ability to meet in person, remote now is going to be part of the lifestyle. You're going to see more businesses meeting remotely. I really believe that the bar, or rather the standard for what constitute a need to meet in person, has been elevated significantly. And then the final one here is impact. Uncertain about the impact. So we know what's different, but we don't know what the impact to our business, our personal life ultimately is going to be, either in the short term or the long term. Now, what's interesting about these different aspects is the more aspects of uncertainty that are at play, the more discomfort, more pain we tend to experience. And that's what's probably most key about the pandemic, and why you might hear more about uncertainty now is because there's some aspect of all of these aspects of uncertainty at play, and not just one or two. So with that backdrop in mind, why is this important to talk about as leaders? And that's my next question. Why is it, as top professionals who really do understand these basics about uncertainty, why should we be taking our time up in a summit like this to talk about uncertainty? And I'll tell you, the real reason is this: we forget that the job of a leader is to bring a sense of certainty to uncertain futures. As leaders, people look to us to solve the uncertainties of life. That's what elevates to us, really, ultimately, to our positions. And when you think about what you do, that's what you really do. You bring sense of certainty to the outcome of a particular project. Another way of saying this is the job of a leader is to continually increase confidence in the belief that a specific future state will occur. That's our jobs. And to the degree that you are really good about increasing the confidence in this belief of certainty, the more clients you're able to convert, you get that yes, and the more clients are really satisfied that when you ultimately satisfy that. But for those who are not developing business the way that they really want, I would just challenge you to really think about, what are you doing or maybe not doing to increase this sense of confidence? Because that's the power question. What are you doing to increase the sense of certainty of experiencing a desired outcome for those you serve? And really, it's not just a power question, it's the money question, right? Because when people come to you, that's really what they're saying beneath the surface. How do you help me make sure this happens? That's that sense of certainty. So that's really why we should be talking about this as leaders, because ultimately it's our job. Okay. So what is the power of uncertainty, which is the title of this program? I really do believe that the power of uncertainty lies in the opportunities it provides. And there are 70. I mean, there are several opportunities it provides, but there's five key ones that I really want to bring our attention to for our time together. And one of the opportunities it provides is to operate on a more level playing field. Think about it. The greater the uncertainty, the more level the playing field. Why? Because none of us knows what's going to happen. Therefore, we all get the opportunity to imagine what could happen and supply for that particular outcome. I mean, it's scenario planning on steroids in many regards, but whoever had an edge before the pandemic, that edge in many respects was wiped out because no one knew what the magnitude, what the impact of this pandemic was going to bring. So many of us were like, yes, this is a start over. I heard one of the speakers say earlier how they imagined themselves, or they imagined themselves to be a startup, and that's really what this was like for many people who really took advantage of this. You get to operate on a more level playing field. So get excited about uncertainty, okay, in that regard. Another opportunity that uncertainty provides to leaders is the opportunity to hone your visioning skills. Again, this is hugely important. So many people think of visioning as this, thing that people who, the conscious crowd, the Zen crowd, the foo-foo crowd, focus on. But when you look at the top leaders, they were considered in many regards to be these visionaries, right? I don't like to use that term visionary because it conjures up this larger than life persona. And that's not what it's ultimately just about. I mean, visioning is taking time to really sit back and imagining alternative futures. Again, scenario planning on steroids. What are potential outcomes and how are you positioning yourself to capitalize on the ones you believe are more likely to play out? And this is where I saw the uncertainty of our times really accelerate a lot of the leaders that I had the privilege of working for. Uncertainty also provides an opportunity to accelerate advancement through innovation. I mean, this imagining process gives you the chance to really create some new things. I've seen businesses totally pivot into whole new products, whole new verticals. I've seen people really tear down their business models and really, like she said, being a startup, creating it from scratch, saying, if I could enter my market today without the prior constraints of my old business model, what would I do? And then do that. We have this opportunity. This is another reason why you want to be excited about uncertainty. Another opportunity is the opportunity to distinguish proactive and intentional thinkers. This is one of those instances where the people who didn't have clues, so to speak, and none of us really did, but the ones who were kind of really vocal about it and just, totally acting oblivious, these are the ones folks turned the blind ear to, and unfortunately was listening to the ones sometimes who had no real foundation, but they were the loudest. But when we are in the dark, we're looking for the person with the flashlight, right? We're looking for the person who has the light. Do you have some thoughts? And I want to remind you here that part of leadership, and this is one of these little things that trip people up, leadership is not about having the right answer. It's about having the ability to facilitate the answer. So even if you didn't know what to do you know how to bring people together to talk about what our next steps are going to be? That's ultimately leadership, which brings me to the next opportunity, and that is to demonstrate advanced leadership skills. I mean, this is your moment to shine. Whatever you might have been hiding, whatever you might have been having on the back burner, not so sure about, this still is, and it was during the whole pandemic, your chance to just brilliantly step forward. Again, when we're in the dark, they're looking for the person with the light. You, with your ideas and your brilliant way of bringing those ideas to light, this is your time to shine. Now, as I think about this summary, these 5 opportunities for leaders to really leverage uncertainty, this is probably a really great screenshot for you because I really want you to go back in your own personal time and think about these different opportunities and how well you really have leveraged these during the pandemic. And what do you need to focus more on to make sure you are coming out of this in a stronger position than you were before we started? So the next question I want to explore really is, how can leaders leverage those opportunities for uncertainty that we just talked about? And the very first one out the gate, you absolutely must have an opportunity mindset. You have got to shift your perspective to see uncertainty as an opportunity rather than an obstacle. Again, if you listen too much to the media, you get that doom gloom attached to uncertainty, and you begin to think, it's hopeless. We're all just struggling, trying to find our way. Yeah, we might all be struggling to find our way, but in reality, there's some of us that are going about it in a more structured way that at least gives us the confidence to approach every single day as an A player with our A game, really determined to not only figure this out, but to capitalize on the moment and come out of this even stronger. So you have got to have that opportunity mindset. And the challenge for leaders here is to really search your heart. Do you really, in fact, have an opportunity mindset, or is it really just lip service you give because you don't want to sound pessimistic? I mean, do you really arrive at that opportunity mindset long after you've covered all the obstacles? No, I'm talking about the folks who really first go to the opportunity and then address the potential obstacles, because you don't ignore the obstacles. No, you don't put your head in the sand, but you will address them, knowing that over time, with will, with stress, with the right strategy, you will in fact overcome. And then brings me to the next key to leverage these opportunities, and that is to confront and subdue the myths and fears around uncertainty. One of the myths that I think that was exposed the most during the pandemic was this myth that what doesn't work for you or your business. I can't tell you how many of my clients had this notion that their business could never operate remotely, that they could never do, you fill in the blank. But we all have this notion, oh no, I can't X, Y, and Z. I can't. When it's necessary, you can do just about anything. So if you can learn to not say what you can't do or what your business can't do, you're going to be head and shoulders above the rest. That's one of those myths that seem so real, but the pandemic has shown us was in fact a myth. Another myth that we really have to confront and get over is this notion that people will act in their own best interest. No, the truth is, and the pandemic showed this, that we operate to satisfy our desires. Our desires in that moment may or may not be in our best interest, whether it be short term or long term. Those are just a couple of the myths that we really need to be really cognizant of as leaders as we want to leverage the power of uncertainty. Another key is to take inventory of what I call the uncertainty leveraging characteristics. For the whole year of 2020, which ended up being a record year for our company, and I'm not talking about by a little bit. COVID really catapulted our results to where I thought we would be 3 years from now. And one of the brilliant things, of course, we do strategic planning. And COVID brought about the need for people to want to review their plans. But I was very intentional about observing the leaders that I get the chance to work with. And I wanted to really see how those who were coping and really thriving well, and in fact, really seeing this as an opportunity, what were some of the things I heard them say or do? So these characteristics are kind of an embodiment of my awareness in that. So I just want to run through them, pretty quickly here, not really focusing too heavily on any one of them, but really the first one I talked about already was that opportunity mindset. Oh, they were all about opportunity. In fact, I can think of two of my clients who, when this came on, I was like, Sherrin, everyone's working remotely. This is the time to really work on developing those strategic thinking skills at my manager level, not just at my EVP or my VP level. They saw it as an opportunity. And before the end of March, we were already doing things like scenario planning and a couple of other intentional things to cascade that out through. So opportunity mindset. Curiosity. You can't have an opportunity mindset without being curious. Oh, I mean, curiosity is so important. I mean, even if it's just to wonder, one of my favorite games to play, and it was really fruitful in the pandemic, was, to answer the question, wouldn't it be great if on the other side of this pandemic, blah, 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 you fill in the blank. Wouldn't it be great if on the other side of this pandemic, we saw our profits double? Wouldn't it be great if on the other side of this pandemic, we saw our ability to reach our customers, the cost of acquisition of a new client to drop by a certain percentage. I mean, when you think about things that way, that's that curious mindset that just propels the thinking down the path to solutions. And this kind of feeds into number 3, productive questioning. And by productive questioning, I mean questioning that challenges the status quo, but not in an adversarial or antagonistic way. This is just asking real kind of questions that say, hey, what can we be doing different? What is this time and opportunity for us to demonstrate? What do we want to see happen on the other side of this? What is it that we really need to know more about to deepen our relationships with our clients? I mean, these are the kind of questions that could lead to those kinds of solutions. So be a productive questioner in that regard. Number 4, adaptability. Yeah, we heard the term pivot. Yes, 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 yes. That's the reframe of adaptability. But it's true. You got to be able to be fluid because you don't know what's coming next. The best you can do is position yourself to respond when you do know what's coming next and to keep business going until then. But you got to be adapt. You cannot be wedded to any one way. This is why I think that myth of you knowing what not going to work in your business, how that just got totally busted out. And the people who couldn't do it faster saw themselves lose out. And I see it happening now. Clients were really forgiving that first few months. But now that we've settled into this, I'm seeing expectations rise again. So you got to be adaptable. Resilience, and you got to be able to bounce back. My goodness, how long does it take for you to get over a disappointment? I mean, is it a minute? And I mean, really get over it. Is it a day? Is it a week? Is it 6 months? I mean, what does it really take for you to recognize, okay, that was disappointing, but man, there's so many more opportunities that I could be missing out if I stay in this frame of mind. You got to get back up. And the faster you can do that, the more likely you are to capitalize on uncertainty. Number 6, disciplined. How many times have we said we were going to do something, but we didn't? I think this pandemic really gave us an opportunity to catch up on all of that stuff. And if you didn't take advantage of it, well, I won't say shame on you, but the opportunity is still here because we're still there in many regards. There were so many things that if we learned more about, so many things that if we just did some of the basic things we said we would do, we'd be ahead. And so the pandemic offers that opportunity to do that. And then finally, you got to be a relentless documenter. And I don't even know if documenter is a real word, but it's my word. In other words, we're having these insights. We're having these, these aha moments. And the people who I see really advanced during this pandemic time are the people who are documenting that. I mean, this was true before the pandemic as well, but I see it being part of the recipe for success during the pandemic. People are documenting their insights so that they can use them and improve upon it. I mean, it's a process to improve upon. But so many people just think, and again, whether you call it journaling, I don't know what you call it, but you really got to get pen to paper so that not only do you remember your brilliant insights, because I don't know if you're like me, but I can read something I wrote a couple of years ago, and if it wasn't in my handwriting, you couldn't have convinced me I wrote that. I mean, that's how much I totally forgot about it, and it was good stuff. I'm like, why did I use that? So documentation is particularly important. All right, so those are just my 7 characteristics. So let me get back to the keys to leveraging. We want to proactively increase your confidence. I talked about how key confidence is to taking action. Well, yeah, there are things you can do to sort of build yourself up and reinforce that, because there's really 2 main ways to build up your confidence. That's either increase your experience, because the more we do something, the more we're confident about our ability to do that. But when you don't have that ability to do that, learning. the more we think we know, the more confident we are in our ability to do something. So if you couldn't service clients or you wouldn't get in business during the pandemic, this should have been your opportunity to truly study up, to gain your confidence, expand your vocabulary, tap into what your clients really needed then, but more importantly, what you think they're going to need later once they're able to think straight. And then finally, there is really formalize your plan refinement process. And let me just tell you what I mean by that. I really do believe the magic of strategic planning is not in all that stuff we do leading up to the first initial deployment of the plan. Now, I facilitate strategic planning for a living. So I say this, with all intent and seriousness here. As a planner, all that stuff is good. But, that brilliant philosopher, Mike Tyson, Mike said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? Your plan likely hasn't been punched in the face enough to have enough intel, enough information to really have a solid plan. So after that first deployment, that's when the real opportunity comes to sit down and say, what have we learned? What does what we learned mean? I mean, how right were we? How wrong were we? And what does that mean for our future deployment of the strategic plan? Well, I think it's the same thing as we think about ourselves coming out of COVID. What did we learn? And what does that really mean for our plans going further in the future? And with some of my clients, we do this weekly refinement process. I mean, checking in. What happened this week that was unexpected for you? What did we learn from that? How should we either incorporate it now into our plans, or how do we capture this in a way to make sure we consider it later as we assess our strategy's effectiveness later? I mean, the refinement program is so key that I really do insist that my clients have an SOP for refinement. All of my clients have an SOP for strategic planning, but they should also have an SOP for refining the strategic plan. And even people who have the SOPs for strategic planning rarely, almost never, have an SOP for refining the plan. That's really critical for planning, and it's really critical now for leveraging the power of uncertainty. So when you think about all of these keys to leveraging uncertainty, another one of those screenshot moments for you to really go back and really think about, how have I really leverage this key? Is this an area for me to really go deeper, go wider, to increase my chances of really coming out of this thing far ahead? As Kimi mentioned earlier in my introduction and in my homework, I work with people who really want and have their eyes set on aggressive growth. And so really taking the quality time to think, and so many people equate accelerated advancement with doing. More oftentimes, accelerated advancement comes with a serious period of thought, which makes our doing more effective. And that's kind of the secret sauce that's beneath the surface there. But I really want you to look at each of these keys to really understand where you should be thinking right now on your own personal education plan. What can you do to up your game to make sure you really are not only being paid what you're worth, but really exposing yourself to all the people who not only need your services, but want your services, and that you are doing a top-notch A-level job for them so that they become your greatest champion. Basically, I like to make all of my clients my de facto Salesforce out there finding business for me. And when you set your clients up for success from the beginning like that, that's in fact what they do. So that's the keys to leveraging the power of uncertainty. Kimi, is there any questions? I know I just zipped through that. There was so much I wanted to share. So maybe there are some questions that I can answer to sort of unpack some of that in the time we have left before I close out completely.
Well, I did get a message, and one of the questions was, how can you help your team actually shake out of some of the impediments and some of the myths about uncertainty? Because some people hold on to a negative myth just because it's the one they know. And so as a result, even if it's good, it's better for them, even if it's much more productive and much more positive for them, they're holding on to the one they know. What is something you can do to help your team lead your team out of that?
Great question. For this presentation, I called it myths, but if I were working with my clients, I would call it biases. And part of my process of strategic planning, we have a specific period in which we address, that is to confront the biases. And biases really are like those elephants in the room, where in which you really have to confront it. And once you called it to the table, we now make a decision about whether or not we want to neutralize that bias or go forward with it, knowing it's there. My goal from the beginning is to really just make my clients aware that they are in fact operating with this bias, because they don't often see it that way. They call these myths facts when it's just their own experience. And so that's what I would start with. So to answer the question, I would have or ferret out, get the group together and to make a list of what are some of the common ways of thinking? What are some of the common beliefs that we've had, even if you don't want to call it bias or if you don't want to call it myths? What are some of the ways of thinking that we've all brought to the table, that we've seen each other? This is where the teamwork comes. And I would just begin to list that. And then I would say, okay, what are some of the ways in which we've seen this backfire or not work in our favor, undermine the results that we're trying to get? This is really a team effort. And you can't just say, hey, Susie, you all the time are constantly, every time we bring up a new idea, the first thing you say is but, or I don't know, you don't do it that way. So maybe the I don't know is a particular bias, but it could also be just a transition and giving herself time to think. But the short answer to the question, Kimi, is simply you gotta call out the elephants in the room. And I like to do that in a team way, documenting everything that we took up. And then, of course, when it comes time to refine that process, because part of my refinement process is to pull back out this list of biases or myths, whatever you choose to call it, to see, okay, these were the biases we brought into this decision. How do we see the effects of these biases now showing up? The process really doesn't take that long to do, but it is a critical element to not only learning from our experience, but capitalizing on our experiences.
Hmm. Which actually is kind of interesting because the second question that I was texted from somebody who unfortunately it got pulled away and said, I don't get to hear I don't get to hear that woman on this uncertainty thing. So could you please ask her this question? I love it. The uncertainty thing. These are articulate people sometimes. I've got to
We
tease them
all are.
about
We
that.
all are.
He said, I have gotten to the point where I have caught people, I think, doing something that I realized now I have also done. And it's this. Now that I'm one of them, one of the bosses, I sometimes get the feeling people are trying to give me information that they think I'll be happy about, not just information that I really need. So that's a combination of, whoa, there goes truth to power and confirmation bias. Those two biases seem to have gotten, joined at the hip or something in this individual situation. And I'm glad he realizes it because I've actually seen a couple of his team members do it. How do you diffuse that?
I got to tell you, Kimi, what you just described as one of those elements, that's a culture issue. It's an absolute culture issue in which a culture has not been established, one that calls that kind of behavior out in a very productive way, but also builds the culture of trust where you do get real answers and not just what you think you want to hear. So when I see people just telling a leader what they want to hear, there's two things at work. They don't feel safe in sharing their honest opinions, and or two, they don't think their honest opinions matter. Doesn't matter what they say, that leader is going to do what he or she wants to do anyway. All of that comes down to culture, and which is one of the things that I always see underlying the work I have to do is, in part, we have to talk about and provide for the high performing culture before we expect consistent execution of a high performing strategic plan. And by the way, I do not believe culture eats strategy for breakfast. As some people would want to say, you have to actually have a strategy for culture. So strategy still comes first in my mind, but it is a culture question.
Okay, I did not coach her for that, ladies and gentlemen, because she actually helped us develop our newest approach at KSP, which is to really articulate that if you don't build a culture by choice, you won't get productivity by design. And we messed with it and we messed with it. And but I also have a problem with that phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast, because if you don't build the culture bit by bit, a culture will happen. You're just not going to like it an awful
You're not
lot.
going to like it much at all. And I'm sure that what Mr. Drucker meant by that in many respects. I've heard his explanation, but the essence of it simply is a bad culture is going to mess up a great strategy. And yeah, I mean, I can come in with a top plan all day long, and if your culture doesn't support it, but I won't even take the client's money. I don't even want to work that, because I only want to work with companies where we're going to succeed, and I can recognize what infrastructure is there and is needed to be shored up to succeed. And culture is always is key with that. So we have to be working on that simultaneously, or else it's just money, and I don't want to take anybody's money. I want their success story more than I want their money.
Amaria, were there any more
Yeah.
questions also?
Yes, I was just going to bring that up. There is a question about how, could you provide some insight into how you convince people about the power of documentation and SOPs?
Oh. All right. Let me give you the really short answer. No SOPs, no scaling. No sustainable scaling is what I should say. No documentation, no sustainable scaling, because you will find yourself having to repeat by mouth every single thing that you want to happen. There's no opportunity for intentional and consistent improvement of processes without documentation. SOPs is the basis of scaling, but they have to be good SOPs. So it's not just about having it documented, but that's a start. We have to document our processes so that we can improve upon it. So that's my short answer. The long answer, we honestly need an hour. Okay. And whoever answered that question, I'd be happy to have an offline conversation with you to talk about that. Absolutely.
And we did put Sherrin's contact information into the main chat. Amaria, anything else?
I do not see any other questions in the chat room right now. Let me scroll down just to make sure. Oh, here we go.
Okay. One of the reasons why I like Amaria as a producer is because she doesn't pop off, top of her mouth. No, she'll actually read, make sure she understands.
Well, it's okay if there's no more. I'm happy to
No,
do my
and
close.
No, there's one more.
I've actually had participants say they appreciate that.
Yeah.
There's one more. So this is about scenario planning. Is it better to do one project well, or different 2 to 3 projects to cover different scenarios because of the uncertainty? For example, in a situation of scarce resources, 1 to 2 people startup.
Yep. I absolutely like multiple at the same time. That's just my preference. I've seen it done well both ways. I just have a preference for working on multiples at the same time, because not only am I wanting to build that scenario planning skill, I'm working on that agility. I'm working on that adaptability. I'm working on, how to be productive with distraction skill. I mean, there's so much into putting out multiple fires, thinking about many different problems at the same time. And really, when I do it that way, it's easy and quickly I'm able to assess what level of leadership I'm working with and customize plans for my clients to address those different levels of leadership.
Oh, there looks like there's another question, Amaria.
Mhm.
I'm not sure.
Here we go. How can you convince senior managers that their organization's culture needs to change?
Are they happy with the results they're getting? And I mean, probe what you mean by happy. Every aspect of their, I mean, not only what is the profit, I mean, what is revenue like, but what is profit like? What is turnover like? What is retention like? I mean, all those aspects, are they really happy? Because if they're happy with every single aspect of their business, then their culture is just fine for them. Maybe not for their employees, but for them, it's just fine. Because if they don't have a pain point in any of those areas, you're talking to your blue in their face. They're not in a condition of readiness. And I learned a long time ago to assess readiness very quickly and table conversations for people who aren't there yet.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, one of the things that you're suggesting is that it's actually a heck of a lot sounder strategy to walk away from a situation in which you can't help somebody to win than it is to walk into that, try to help them win, take what can possibly be a pretty significant fee, and just understanding that your chances of moving them because their level of readiness was off were somewhere between 0 and 0.2%.
You know, Kimi, I started this company, about a little over 20 years ago. And in the beginning, like most people, you are looking to take what you can get because you're trying to get your boots off the ground, so to speak. And the good part of that is you get revenue. The bad part of that is you get a bad reputation because ultimately you're not going to be successful and definitely not in the way where they're going to be your raving fan. So you're getting money, but you're not getting reputation. And reputation will help you get far much money later. But I do understand you got to pay the bills. So I would tell you, if you can afford to, you leave those people alone because they are a drain. They end up taking up the most of your time and hence become the least profitable for you. And ultimately, not the testimonial you're looking for, because that's what you're looking for when you're launching those testimonials.
Well, that actually leads us into the next speaker, which will be at 2 o'clock Central Time, because Aidan Crawford talks about what the level of importance is of building your reputation and your brand, in part because in today's environment, probably tomorrow's, it's one of the few things I am less uncertain about. Our profession as project managers is going to become even more of a gig economy. And to a lot of what Sherrin is talking about, if you do not have a deliberate and intentional plan of how you're going to not just survive, but thrive in that environment, you have to understand how you're marketing in that environment. And here's the thing, just like culture, if you don't build your brand, the marketplace will.
Yep, they will definitely define that for you, right? You know, well, Kimi, I'll just close out by saying, unprecedented uncertainty creates unprecedented opportunity to advance. I guess that's my closing message for you guys, is see this really as a time of more leveled playing fields. See this as a time to really become more visionary like in your thinking, but see this as a time to just run faster than you ever were able to run before. Because again, people are looking for someone who has the answer or either has the ability to facilitate that answer. So it has been an absolute pleasure, Kimi, to speak with your groups. I would love it if anyone is interested in connecting with me on LinkedIn.
Which is why it's in the chat, folks.
In the chat box, just click on that link and go say connect. I would love to conversate with all the wonderful folks that have attended this wonderful, wonderful summit. And in the end, I really just say there's a power to uncertainty. Go out there and leverage it. Thanks, Kimi.
Thank you so much, Sherrin.